So, what we want to do, why we're talking of plastics and how NIUA is involved is largely because waste is part of the overall framework on climate change. And within waste, plastic actually has begun to be understood increasingly as a very, very important and a very challenging component because it is part of our everyday lives in a very irretractable way. And within that, packaging is the largest. But packaging has allowed us to lead a particular kind of quality of life, no matter what the geographical distance. So the challenge is, what do you do with plastics, particularly packaging plastics? And if you look at it from beginning to end, because most plastics, even today, even in the most developed world, come from fossil fuels, and that's why it's part of the climate change conversation also. And India accounts for 9% of the global production of plastic resin, which is the basic formulation by which you will actually get and plastics and mold them. And it's a very big, very big industry. And the growth rate is 10 to 11%. And a lot of this, or most of this, is actually packaging, because as there are new products, there's new demand, there's a lot of packaging. And we can change the slide. And India alone consumes about 11 kilos per person, which is actually quite little compared to the US, which is almost much, much more. However, we have to remember that it's COVID time, which means that we're having a very difficult time saving ourselves, and we're forced to use a large numbers of plastics, whether we're looking at gloves, whether we're looking at woven HDPE suits, or whether we're looking at masks. And so we have a big increase in that, and that is also a new challenge. When we look at how many plastics in India, how much is that? You can just look at how much goes to the ocean. We'll just look at one number today. 1,26,500 tons of plastic waste goes into the Indian Ocean, goes into the oceans by India. And what is really important for us to know is that most of it is through riverine means, which means our rivers. And of these rivers, the Ganga, is the seventh largest, carrier of plastics into the oceans because of the way that the plastics leak. Next, please. Now, when we talk of plastics, we just talk of plastics as a generic thing. But in order to reduce these leakages from a municipal system into an ecological system, we have to be a little more nuanced. And single-use plastics are the target of our work, of countermeasures, and of the government of India. And you can broadly call SUPs, as they're called, the short form. Everything has a short form, as use and throw items that you'll use and exactly once before you throw them away. And you can include straws, you have bottles, you have cups, you have those kinds of things. And the reason that we use them is they're just very convenient, above all. Next, please. And 80% of the marine population comes from these. Now, there's a lot of alarm around this, and it's quite right? Because plastic waste is 8% of the total solid waste. And you would all remember that just till as recently as the late 90s, only 20% was dry waste, and the rest was all considered traditionally a combination of inert and wet waste. And in that dry waste, we used to have things like cardboard. And plastic didn't play this kind of big role. But more importantly, most of the plastic could be recycled because it was PET, because it was what they call in colloquial language dibba balti, which is like, as you can imagine, thick HDPE kind of plastic. And we almost have 8 million metric tons of recycled plastics in our country. So India is actually a very major consumer of plastics, although we produce only 9% of the resin. And globally, as you can see, the numbers are much, much bigger. And when we talk of discarding, very often we say, why can't we learn from these rich countries? But the 151 million tons of discarded plastics that you see on this slide is very important to note that basically that number doesn't mean that it's safely recycled within the country, or made into pavers, the kinds of innovations we see in this country. Very often wealthier countries send their waste to other countries. So in that sense, waste becomes one country's waste becomes gets dumped on another country. So there is no choice basically but to reduce our waste as a society, as a country, and as a planet. Next, please. There's a really important thing we wanted to talk to you about, because many of you, or your families in your personal lives, would have got this WhatsApp which says a banana peel will disintegrate in 30 days, but a plastic will take 50 years or 20 years or 400 years. They were all different numbers. But the fact is that plastic only disintegrates in terms of how far the human eye can see. And mostly through weathering, through sunlight, through the sheer physical impact of, and you can see the diagram here. It could be waves, it could be rain, some plastics weather because of extreme heat. All of these break that plastic into smaller particles, and the most important or dangerous ones are microplastics. Microplastics are less than 5 millimeters, and it's impossible to see it. In fact, these collections of suspended plastics in the oceans are known as gyres. And there are several gyres, well, actually, these are parts of the ocean, but several parts of gyres in particular in the world have a propensity, a tendency to accumulate microplastics. And if you look at, I've been to 2 of them, and the water is the most beautiful turquoise blue. But only when the samples are taken and analyzed do you realize it's full of microplastics. So microplastics, to put it in summary, are very difficult for us to see. The problem is that these, because they're invisible in water, smaller animals, molluscans, fish, all of them take them into their bodies. And as a consequence, these are, when we eat, say, fish, we're also ingesting microplastics. When we drink fresh water straight from a river, saying, it's totally clean, we might be drinking microplastics. We don't know for sure. We haven't sampled every single sample of water available in the country. But for sure, there's a lot of metabolic disorder happening globally when microplastics are taken into the body by smaller animals. So, for example, clams, smaller kinds of fish, they develop these kinds of boils and they have metabolic disorders, including on the liver when they take this in. This is a global trend. But eventually, as this diagram shows, that without countermeasures, the ocean will have more plastic waste than fish by 2040. So next, please. I think this is just a little case study so that we can show you Agra Nagar Nigam. This is just one example. You can all make it to your own, but it really shows you how so many cases were done. The blue there is the Jamna Ji, and you can look at how, even though plastics were banned, there's a whole backlog of plastics, and it's a big challenge for any city in our country, and in fact, most cities in the world. Next, please. This is just a waste flow, but I'll go to the next one. In the interest of time, we can get this out too. Next, please. So Subhi's already introduced to us countermeasures 1 and 2. So I'll talk a little more about the countermeasures project here. The countermeasure project has been, as Subhi explained, it's really, the broad idea is to really track and survey and stop the leakage of plastics into 2 of the greatest rivers in the world, obviously Ganga, and also the Mekong River. And in the first part, which ended previously, which ended in 2020, there were many cities like Haridwar, Agra, Prayagraj along the Ganga, and Mumbai, because Mumbai is along the coast. And these were identified as leakage hotspots, which means places from which a lot of plastics is leaking into the ocean, whether it leaks as microplastics or macroplastics, because the truth is that most macroplastics will become microplastics. And I want to emphasize that once more, because very often we see that a big piece of plastic has come out from a dolphin, but what we don't see is the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little pieces of plastic that are already in the dolphin and we'll never know. So what countermeasures is doing is taking cognizance of the most difficult part of plastics and acting on that to build capacity to stop this leakage. Next, please. Very briefly, this project was in two parts. Countermeasures 2 started last year. And what happened there, and this would be of great interest to municipalities, is that the question that was asked was, if we build capacity, then whose capacity should we build? And what capacity building is required? And in order to understand that, a series of exercises were undertaken. So the first one was a stakeholder analysis. And the stakeholder analysis went through a very rigorous process and identified who would be the most important stakeholders in the two cities of Agra and Patna, because this is where a bulk of the capacity building is happening in CM2, as we call it. As I said, everything has a short form. And we identified for Agra, the municipality, the ULB, and the same for Patna. In both cases, we identified the informal sector, that they played a really big role. In Agra, we identified the tourism sector as a key third stakeholder, but civil society in Patna. So as you can see that the stakeholders can overlap also, and they can be different also. And after that, we did a bunch of surveys, rigorous surveys, to understand what were the perceptions of these key stakeholders in both these cities. And it was extremely interesting because despite a hard lockdown and loss of income, the informal sector was not particularly excited about learning more about plastics because they hadn't seen the linkage between plastics, some of the new laws, and they didn't know about the case studies in other parts of the country where informal sector is actually making money by working and building its own capacity. But there were several insights there. Meanwhile, NPC, the National Productivity Council, actually went out to Patna, and they'd already, by the way, done that in Agra and CM1, and they actually mapped all the leakage hotspots. Where is the plastic leaking from? How is it leaking? And most importantly also, what kinds of plastics were leaking? And we'll come to that in a bit. But what was very interesting was that this also coincided with a lot of other data that was pointing in the same direction. So now, as a result, we have a very good sense of what plastic leaks because we have the data from multiple sites. Finally, based on what we were learning about, we created a capacity building program and tested it. And that's what this is about. So we'll go to the next slide now. So, we all know that what can you do? You should reduce plastics. And then you have to have improved end-of-life management. So I don't need to tell you that. In fact, you know this much better than any of us here. But what becomes very important is how do we think of reduction? Because it's not about a fact that I don't use a plastic bag. We have to think as municipalities, as institutions, we have to think in a systems way. Next, please. So a systems level thinking will bring us to the circular economy. And the circular economy is a way in which you keep a material in circulation at more or less the same usage, as well as more or less the same quality, which means that you have to redesign your materials, right? So you have to eliminate all kinds of plastic items which aren't very useful. For example, You also reduce some toxicity. You redesign so that you can reuse, or perhaps you don't need to use if packaging is redesigned. And finally, you also look at circulation, which means, for example, what can you use so that the material stays in circulation. Now, so what you basically do is you decouple the consumption of plastics from the fact that it's a finite resource, because oil is a finite resource. And that's what you call fossil fuel. So that's a more conceptual idea that we wanted to share. Next, please. Next, please. Now, extended producer responsibility. I'm going to hand over to Gautam for this. Gautam, if you could take over.
Thanks, Bharti. So, in terms of ensuring that we are able to move towards a circular economy framework, there are certain mechanisms and certain frameworks which help to enable that particular piece. Now, we all know that there are producers of goods who put their products in the market. They're sold by retail outlets. We purchase them, we use them, and them once but in doing disposal bit, if we are not thinking about the environment, then these particular products natural ecosystems, they are not disposed, if they're not disposed of well, and they pollute the natural ecosystem as such, because they're made out of chemicals which then disintegrate. When Bharti was mentioning about plastics and they're converting into microplastics through the use of natural forces like the sun, rain, the waves, or for that matter, how they move into the soil. All of these, the erosion that takes place and the formation of microplastics that take place, similarly, these microplastics, because they're made of these chemicals, the polymers, it's very difficult for them to disintegrate into such natural ecosystems. Now, an economy of this kind of nature is called a linear economy, the one where you try and dispose it of in an environmentally sound manner so that it gets recycled and can be reused once again. That is what is called the circular economy. Now, the extended producer responsibility framework per se tries to ensure that you can move from a linear to a circular economy. So what happens is that a producer, after they put their product into the market, on certain products they give you a warranty, and this particular warranty basically is for a specific time period, and within the time period, if there is a problem in that particular product, then you can actually go back to the producer, manufacturer, the brand owner, and get your product and get the problem rectified. But in cases like plastics, where then a warranty is available, you basically use them, you throw them. If it is not collected by somebody, lies in the environment, then it creates a problem going forward. So the government decided, and the EPR framework basically has been around now since the last 30 years. It was propounded by a very well-known Swedish economist called Thomas Lindqvist, and he suggested that the producers who are basically putting the product in the market should not only be responsible till the warranty time period, but should be responsible for the entire life cycle of the product per se, which means that you put the product in the market while it is being used by the consumer, you give a warranty, but once the consumer is about to dispose it off, then it is the responsibility of the producer to ensure that the product is collected properly. The product is then transported properly across to a recycler who would then recycle that particular end of life product in order to ensure that it can then create a circular economy, get back into manufacturing from the output that comes out of the recycled product. So extended producer responsibility in terms of plastic packaging would be that if a producer, importer, or a brand owner, and they have different sets of definitions for themselves, they put any kind of product in the market which has plastic packaging on it, then that particular plastic packaging has to be collected by them, has to be sent across to a recycler so that it is recycled properly. Now, plastics we know is a very useful product and comes in different kinds of forms. So there are different categories which have been prescribed within the notification for EPR, which has come out last year. There's three specific categories there which have been defined. The first one is the rigid plastic packaging. So that would primarily be the bottles. For example, your mineral water bottles, they would primarily come under rigid plastic packaging. Then you would have flexible plastic packaging, which would primarily be the polythene sheets which you use for packing, or the plastic bags that you use for packing because they can be twisted into any particular shape and size. And the third one would be multi-layered packaging, where you would mostly be talking of packaging for, say, chips packets, packaging for biscuit packets, because there is a plastic packaging there and there is an aluminum packaging as well, which is why it is called multi-layered packaging. Now, specifically, these three different types of packaging have different recyclability potential within them, and there is different kinds of technology available for recycling of these different kinds of packaging too. These three different categories have been created specifically considering the recyclability potential of these packaging materials and the degree to which circularity can be embedded within these materials. And it has been tried to, the government has tried to promote this particular piece along with these categories in order to ensure that more and more plastics can get recycled, can get converted, can get reused into different kinds of packaging once again, so that you are less dependent upon refining more crude oil and producing plastics out of it. Next slide, Shruti.
Just 1 second, I'm just changing it.
Yeah. So along with this, when you talk of the EPR for plastic packaging, now there are different sets of actors who have kind of been described within the ambit of the rules. Now, per se, within the plastic waste management rules, you have the ULB, which is also responsible. You have the mention of different sets of stakeholders who are supposed to ensure that the entire value chain that gets created around these kinds of plastics actually helps in its disposal. And EPR as a framework basically tries to bring in the monetary angle to create those value chains and embed material flows in order to ensure that a circular economy framework is created. Now, the impact which EPR creates, that basically the packaging product that is put into market, it is used by the consumer, it is disposed of, and then you have different kinds in which it is disposed of. The people who mix up the plastic with wet waste as well and dispose of, that leads to a lowering of the value of that particular plastic. Nobody would like to pick it up. The people who segregate the plastics and then dispose it of, which is where the recycler is interested in ensuring that they recycle it and get it back into the value chain for production once again. Then there are plastics which are of such low value that if they get mixed with any kind of mixed waste or wet waste, they are very difficult to recycle. Nobody is interested, so the municipality has no other option but to take it to a landfill or a dump site and then dump the entire piece there, where then it lies for tens and hundreds of years. And the littering, etc., which happens if you're not disposing of the plastics in a proper manner, that can actually take the route of smaller drains to bigger drains and then find its way into riverine ecosystems, and from riverine ecosystems into marine ecosystems as well. So, in effect, it is not the producer who is responsible just because he's putting a product in the market where It has consumer demand. We all are trying to use it. It is us who are responsible in terms of how we are disposing of the material, the plastics. So the producer is responsible to the extent that he can provide the relevant infrastructure to us so that we are able to dispose it properly. But at the end of the day, it is also our responsibility within the plastic waste management rules of 2016 that we dispose of the material properly, segregate it at our household level when it reaches end of life in order to ensure that it can be sent across, collected, transported, and sent across for recycling. So an inclusive model ensures that all of these different stakeholders who are there in the entire material flow, they are integrated, which the plastic waste management rules talk of. EPR as a framework puts the responsibility on certain sets of stakeholders in order to ensure that they do a good job of this so that the plastic waste management rules are implemented and the material finds circularity embedded in it. Next slide, Shruti. So in terms of the urban local bodies, how can they enable the change with EPR? When it comes to urban local bodies, they're supposed to provide infrastructure within the confines of the geographical area which they are managing, where waste management is one key function service that they provide. Now, in order to ensure that all the waste is collected at a decentralized level, they're supposed to provide material recovery facilities where such material can come in. It can then be segregated into different parts, dry waste, wet waste, different kinds of plastics, of glass, of paper, and then be channelized across to these recyclers. Now, with EPR, you actually try and get into this framework where such functions can be provided or are supposed to be provided by producers, importers, and brand owners who are the key stakeholders because they are putting plastics into the market. Now, within this entire framework, what you see is the municipality, which can enable these private actors to come up, set up such infrastructure, which can actually help to get access to material at a decentralized level, segregate it, and then ensure that it is channelized across to proper recyclers. But what do the PIBOs or the producers, importers, brand owners gain out of it? Now, because it is a mandate by the Government of India, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, who has brought the rule, the producer, importer, brand owner has to ensure that they follow the EPR framework, they ensure compliance under the framework, and meet a certain set of targets which they have been provided with of the total quantum of plastic waste which they have to collect of the total quantum that they have put in the market. So in order to ensure that they are able to manage their compliance properly, they can work closely with the ULBs, which is the area where the maximum amount of waste generation takes place because India is kind of urbanizing at a very fast rate. And that is something where the ULB can actually try and reduce its waste management service costs. It reduces the cost of the entire function per se because it is the producer now who's responsible to collect, segregate, transport. They get credits from the plastic waste processors, who are again a different, who are either recyclers or cement companies or make oil out of plastics or build roads out of plastics. But they get credits from them, which is what helps them to ensure compliance under the EPR framework. Next slide, Shruti. Now, per se, if you look at it, we already mentioned about category 1, category 2, category 3. Now, this entire new framework, which has been proposed in 2021, the notification came out on the 6th of October last year. They have proposed that you slowly try and embed the circular economy framework by doing three key things. One, of course, you collect all the plastic that you put into the market and ensure that it is recycled. That is one. Second, you try and reuse some of the plastic as well. So for different categories, there are different sets of targets considering what can be reused. So specifically when it comes to rigid plastic packaging, the targets are fairly high where you can reuse the bottle. So as we normally see, say for example, Bisleri, they have a 5 liter bottle can as well. They have a 20-liter bottle as well. So all of these are reused, which can help them to meet their reuse targets. Reusing of plastic packaging means that the amount of plastic packaging which would have been otherwise put on market is getting reduced as well. So that is something which is really important, that we try and reuse as much as we possibly can. And the third bit in this is the use of recycled plastic. So there are targets for that as well. So that for different kinds of plastic packaging, they are embedded with some amount of recycled plastic as well, so that the quantum of recycled plastics which comes out gets back into the manufacturing and production chain, thereby creating a circular economy framework. So in effect, what is happening is, if you look at the 3R principle, which talks about reduce, reuse, and recycle, those 3R principles are getting embedded within the EPR framework, leading to creation of a circular economy. Because the plastics economy is huge, because the plastics economy is really important, it is also important to understand the impact that it leaves on the environment if we do not enhance circularity, which is where the EPR framework, as has been proposed by the government, is well-meaning in terms of its design, which will help to ensure that we move from a linear to a circular economy. Next slide, please. Now, as I was mentioning, these are the mandatory use of recycled plastics in the plastic packaging. So you see that category 1, it has the highest percentage because it's easier to use PET in terms of recycling it, and India is one of the largest recycling uh, countries as far as PET is concerned. We recycle more quantum of PET than even Europe can possibly do. For category 2, which is a little difficult to recycle, the targets for reuse of recycled material there is slightly lower, and it is the lowest for MLPs because the technology for recycling MLPs is very difficult, not generally found in the country, and is fairly expensive as well, whereas the material has very, very low value per se. So we can see from these three that the idea is to try and get those kinds of materials which have higher recyclability to be used, to be reused in terms of recycled material again and again. But for the rest of the material, which is of low value, they can then be sent across to cement kilns, they can be sent across for road building with using plastics, and they can be sent for waste to oil processing as well, so that you can do pyrolysis and you can create oil out of plastics. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of developing this inclusive model, and this is something which we propose to the ULBs to try and think about it, while the EPR framework, which was published, which was notified last year, that does not talk about specific set of roles for responsibilities for the ULB, the ULB can actually play a key role in case it is providing access to waste infrastructure in terms of MRFs. It is ensuring segregation and then transporting it across to recyclers for ensuring environmentally sound disposal of plastics. In such cases, what the ULB can do is they can try and get into contractual obligations or agreements with the plastic waste processors so that they have access to plastic waste credits. So plastic waste processors will process the plastic waste, will recycle them, and then be able to generate credits for them as well. These credits can then be transferred across to ULBs because they are providing the recyclers with all the raw material which they require to run their facility in terms of waste plastics. And these particular credits can then be sold across to PIBOs, which are the producers, importers, and brand owners. So what you need basically is an agreement with the plastic waste processor. You provide the material, ask him to generate the credits after recycling, share those credits with you, and then you can sell those credits across to PIBOs. What that does effectively is the service cost which you have incurred while providing waste management services to the people within the ULB, it can cover to a great extent these service costs and also to some extent the capital costs which you would have invested in developing the infrastructure in the form of material recovery facilities where you're actually segregating the waste and taking out those fractions which are useful for recyclers and provide feedstock to them. Next slide, please. Bharti, would you like to take over from here? Okay, I'll carry on till Bharti comes in. So in terms of sustainable consumption and lifestyles, and when we are talking of the 3R principle per se, which talks about reduce, reuse, and recycle, it is important that we take them all one at a time. Now, sustainable consumption lifestyles would ideally look at targeting the reduce principle, where you try and reduce your consumption to the extent that you consume only what is significantly required at that particular point of time. In terms of plastics, we've seen people who go out, and even in the data that was collected in Patna and in Agra, it came out that on an average day, there are people who, from different sets of outlets, collect something like 5 to 6 plastic packets or those plastic pannis, as you call it, every day. Now, one of them, if collected, or if they could actually take a cloth bag from their home when they went shopping, would actually reduce the consumption of plastic packaging in the form of these pannis to a very large extent. So this is something which probably we need to be a little more careful about in order to ensure that we are using all of this packaging in a sustainable manner. Secondly, you have the plastic waste rules, which are kind of moving towards banning of single-use plastic, which will lead to a reduction in the use of such plastic material, which is very difficult to recycle and uh, which will also be very damaging to the environment as a whole because it's very easy to leak into such water-based ecosystems. So the single-use plastic ban, which came out in August last year and which will be getting effective from the 1st of July 2022, is a very important step in that direction in order to ensure that our lifestyles become more sustainable. And it is also important for all of us to actually become aware through such outreach programs which are being conducted, and also then go ahead and advocate to other sets of people around us in order to ensure that such bans which are being put into place through amendments in the rules are effectively implemented, and it is ensured that such materials do not pollute our environment as such and do not cause leakages which can then form marine plastic litter, which is very difficult to manage after that. Next slide, please. Now, per se, when it comes to the amendment of these rules, specific single-use plastic items which have been banned include plates, cups, glasses, cutlery like forks, spoons, knives, straws, trays, etc. Now, all of these items that you see, these are all single-use plastic items. You use them once and then you dispose them off, but it is very difficult to collect these items and dispose them off because they hardly have any value embedded in them. Furthermore, going ahead, the items which are supposed to be banned from July 1st, 2022 include earbuds, which have plastic sticks for balloons, plastic flags, candy sticks, ice cream sticks, and thermocol, which is primarily used for decoration. So these items are banned. It would make a lot of sense if you could take note of all of these items and then propagate it within the municipal confines in order to ensure that Retailers do not sell these items and consumers do not demand such items as well, so that we can get rid of them and we can ensure that leakages of such items do not create havoc with our water-based ecosystems. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of a waste collection system, the possible things that you can look at in order to ensure that you are able to stop leakages of plastic waste happening into riverine and marine ecosystems, you could increase the frequency of waste collection and segregation in order to ensure that more plastic waste can be channelized into recycling. And the collection of low value plastic waste, if that can be enhanced and then sent across to recyclers, where you can then try and get in touch with PIBOs to ensure that they are able to finance the entire piece under EPR, you'll be able to have robust collection systems put into place, which will ensure to stop plastic waste leakages. Next slide. We've kind of covered this particular slide earlier. Furthermore, in terms of infrastructure, what you can possibly do is just outside of the municipal confines, you can actually try and see if there is land available where you can set up decentralized plastic recycling facilities under the MSME model, or you can try and go in for public-private partnership to set up such recycling infrastructure, which will actually help you to ensure that there is a continuous demand for plastic waste within the ULB from such recyclers, because they have to run their business as well, which will help you to create these value chains for low value plastics as well, so that they can easily be collected, segregated, channelized across to such recyclers, and ensure that they are recycled and a circular economy is created, while the waste burden of the ULB is reduced significantly, because you will now have very limited amount of waste to actually landfill or put it across on a dump site. Next slide, Shruti. Specifically, when it comes to how work can possibly be done, there are case studies which are presented over here. This is a case study where the North Delhi Municipal Corporation has provided land to Chintan, and on that particular piece of land, material recovery facility has been developed through financial assistance from Coca-Cola. And this material recovery facility ensures that it is able to employ a lot of the informal actors, train them, provide them with adequate personal protective clothing, so that they're able to do their work, segregate a lot of the plastic waste, and then channelize it across to recyclers. Coke, for all the financial assistance that it has provided, it gets access to EPR credits for the work that Chintan does. And the plastic waste that gets collected, segregated, is actually sold to recyclers to make enough money for informal actors. So in an essence, what happens is you create a sustainable system, likewise, which actually helps you to, one, fulfill your obligations within the solid waste and plastic waste management rules of 2016, ensures livelihood support to informal actors, builds their capacities, and ensures that they do a better job while keeping environment and health safety guidelines in mind, gets the formal side of things to get moving in terms of the EPR obligation fulfillment for larger companies like, say, Coca-Cola here, so that they are able to meet their EPR targets, and ensures that the municipality is able to reduce its headache to a large extent as far as provision of waste management services are concerned, and then the piles of waste which come up in different parts of the city, and we see quite a few mountains of that in Delhi today. Next slide, please. So in Zakira, what happens is you have storage. So you have material which comes in once you're able to segregate it in plastic, since it takes a lot of volumetric space, there are balers which have been provided by Coca-Cola, which helps them to bale and keep and store the waste to a large extent so that it can be sent out in larger trucks across to recyclers. For ease of working for women and for local composting, you have conveyor belts which have been put into place in order to ensure that material which is not required, which does not have value, or wet waste that then can go into composting. For plastic waste, you have different types on which they have been trained to segregate from the waste that comes into the facility, so that all of these can then be baled and sent across to respective recyclers. There are different sets of informal sector players who maintain the MRF, who ensure procurement, segregation, sales, and ensure coordination with the North Delhi Municipal Corporation as well, so that they can always monitor the work which is going on at a very high level of quality. Next slide, please. These are certain pictures, and you can see them, the conveyor belts, the segregation bins which are put in there. And very difficultly say that this is a waste management facility because it's so clean. Next slide. This is another picture from there. This is how it looks from the outside. Key learnings which Chintan has had and which you can now use to basically take the work forward in your respective ULBs as well. Train the informal sector, try and ensure that you bring in the angle of EPR compliance, get in touch with PIBOs so that they get access to plastic waste and they pay for it as well in order for the services that you're providing on their behalf. Enable the informal sector through training, capacity building so that they can run these facilities by themselves. Encourage the public to ensure that they try and segregate as much as possible so that these MRFs can run at a higher level of quality and be financially sustainable for you as well. Provide services or provide infrastructure for composting as well in order to ensure that the wet waste then does not have to be transported so that the ULB can save on transportation costs, and the composted material that can actually be sold across in smaller packets to households who are maintaining their pots. In terms of ensuring that you're able to do a good job, try and set up systems through which data is regularly collected. You have compliance obligations which have to be met so that data can be used to ensure that these compliance are being met as per the solid waste and plastic waste management rules. Make it financially sustainable through ensuring that informal actors are also trained in entrepreneurship so that they are able to run these facilities by themselves, make money, and ensure that the ULB can actually try and solve a large part of its waste problem at a very, very low cost. Next slide. Specific support that the informal sector could possibly require over here would be access to doorstep collection of waste, space for segregation in terms of these MRFs that can be put up, identity cards so that people know that they are in that particular kind of livelihood, insurance, bank account, and of course training, capacity building so that they're able to do a better job than they already do right now. Next slide. These are certain sources and pathways into how leakages lead to creation of marine litter. So this is something which you should try and safeguard against and ensure doorstep waste collection is provided to 100% of the households in order to ensure that such waste does not get leaked and move into rivers and then into seas or oceans. Next slide. This is another case study. This is a model which was developed by Chintan, where they developed this particular app called Pick My Trash. And Pick My Trash ensures that anybody who kind of requests for a service for doorstep collection, they can actually go onto the app, they can request for the service. Chintan goes to their doorstep, picks up all the trash and ensures that it comes across to an MRF, gets segregated and then moves across to recyclers. Now, what is important is to understand that Chintan does not pay for it because they're providing such service where they're incurring transportation costs. And Chintan then tries to segregate all of this material in order to ensure that this material can then be sold across to recyclers, which helps to meet its cost. The data that gets collected through all of the service is very important because the EPR obligation, which is there for PIBOs, such data can then be shared with PIBOs, and credits can then be generated from the plastic waste processors so that PIBOs can get access to it. But they pay Chintan for the cost that is incurred in terms of meeting transportation expenses for such materials so that the service can become sustainable. Next slide. Again, key learnings. It helps to improve incomes of waste pickers where they're providing such service to you at your doorstep. And a lot of waste actually gets diverted across from landfills into recycling through these services which are provided at a doorstep. Otherwise, people would have normally thrown the waste across on streets, on roads, which would have leaked then into drains and rivers, leading to marine litter. Next slide, please. Yes, Shruti, you can go ahead with the exercise.
Hello, thank you so much, Mr. Mehra, for this, and thank you so much, Bharati. So with this, we will be moving on to doing some exercises. The first two exercises will be just a poll to understand your thoughts on your everyday use of plastics and your idea of why plastics can be a problem. So, Vaishnavi, if you could just help with the technical aspect of it, and then I can take over once we do the Mentimeter question.
Sure, Shruti. Can you stop sharing your screen so I can pull mine?
Sure, sure. Just one.
So I think the first thing that we will do is do the Mentimeter exercise. So if you can use your phone and click the link that was shared in the chat box. Alternatively, you could also log on to www.menti.com and enter the code that is shared again on the chat box, which is 50589429.
Encouraging everyone to join in for the exercise. The link is on the chat.
Access this from your required. You can just click the link and join. Sorry, I'll have to move between the screens because we have people joining. Yeah. So if anyone's facing any trouble joining, just let us know and we can help you out. So we have around 7 participants who've logged in. We'll just wait for another minute and then proceed. Shruti, I'm just going to go to the next question. I think there are quite a few participants on board.
Sure, sure. Let's just start. Okay. So the first question is, which of these are plastic according to you? Your first option is a warm fleece jacket, the jackets that we wear in the winter, signature warm fleece jackets, artificial grass that we see on the surface, polyester shirts, packaging for chips, sweet boxes, and PET water bottles. I'm very curious about the one person who said warm fleece jacket actually. Okay, now there are two people. Can someone who's answered the question, tell us on chat why they think their jacket is has plastic in it? Is there someone who wants to tell us why they feel the warm fleece jacket has plastic? Or even sweet boxes? Okay, so I see that maximum people have said that PET water bottles have plastic in them. Um, and so most people have said packaging for chips and PET water bottles. Um, and three people have said jackets, and two people have said sweet boxes. Um, so I think I want to say that, well, all of them have plastic in them. And in fact, plastics, even for polyester shirts, a lot of people have said that only five people have said that polyester shirts have plastic in. But textiles have a lot of plastic within them, and that can be that can be polyester, sometimes artificial materials, any kind of artificial material that is made, especially in textiles, has some amount of plastic in it. And when we say sweet boxes, um, oh wow, that's very interesting. Someone says that the jackets feel plastic while touching, which is true. That's one very interesting way of understanding it. That's for sure. And so with sweet boxes as well, there are a lot of sweet boxes which have, there's a concept of multi-layered plastics. So there'll be plastics, they'll have many layers. Sometimes they'll have layers of paper, but there'll also be a layer of plastic, which then makes it that's a terminology. It's multi-layered plastic. So there is different materials, but also plastics within it. So, thank you for your responses and your participation. Should we move on to the next question, Vaishnavi? Okay, so on an everyday basis, which of the following plastic items do you use? Okay, let's see what we get maximum responses for. Okay, so maximum people say they use polythene bags and chips and snacks packaging, and also sachets. So, of course, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I mean, it's just indicative of the fact that plastics are so commonplace, and so all of us have almost all of us have to end up using plastics because we don't have affordable alternatives to it. So there is a whole movement around thinking about alternatives, asking for mass investment in alternatives. So I think this is something that we have experienced, that whenever we've spoken about certain plastics and we see with our experience with, say, the New Delhi Municipal Council, we've seen that they're so willing to actually do away with a lot of plastics, but their question is, what is an affordable alternative? So I think we need a lot of research and data around that, and that's a gap that really needs to be addressed by everyone, including civil society organizations, including academics, including governments, including urban local bodies. It's a question that all of us need to ask. So, so with that, should we move on to the next? Okay. So with this, let's move on to the Miro board exercise. Rajat, do you want to share the
Hi,
screen?
I'll just share the screen. Just give me a few seconds. So is my screen visible?
Yes. Click
So
that
is the
link
Miro
and
board visible
join
right
the
now?
board that Rajat is sharing with you all. And in case if anyone faces any trouble joining in, just do let us know so we can help you out on that.
Okay. So so I hope everyone is in the link, actually, the waste minimization link that Vaishnavi shared. So basically, the objective of the exercise right now is to kind of visually understand what Dr. Gautam Mehra explained about establishment of a successful EPR regime. So that is like the objective of this exercise. And through this, we'll go through three processes to understand this. And for each three processes, we'll do three different exercises. So the first exercise is about marking which stakeholder has the highest level of engagement when it comes to establishing EPR. So right now in the screen, we have different sets of stakeholders, say ULBs, residents welfare associations, informal sector waste workers, civil society organizations, citizens, tourists, and brand owners. And we need to drag and drop which stakeholder has the which priority each stakeholder has. So assign one priority to each stakeholder. So I'll just drag and drop. I'm seeing that people are already starting it. So, and to move around the Miro board, please use your right mouse and left mouse to take a drag and drop the dots.
Can you also zoom in a little on the screen because it's not
Yeah, sure, sure.
very well visible?
Is it visible right now? The
Yes,
screen?
yes, it's visible now.
Yes. So this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Most participants have actually mentioned that the ULBs have the highest priority, and the producers, brand owners, and the citizens. So I'll give a minute to everyone. So a minute or two to everyone to actually put in their priorities, and we'll see which stakeholder has the highest priority.
Meanwhile, I would also really like it if someone on chat tells us why they think brand owners have a high priority, urban local bodies have a high priority, or are high priority stakeholders, or in fact why they feel that certain like informal sector waste pickers have medium engagement and low engagement. We would love to hear from someone on chat if possible. We would really encourage that.
Yeah, we could also invite the participants to unmute and speak if required.
Yeah, sure. Mhm.
If they can't type on the chat. So either ways should work.
So I think unmute and chat will be a great way. So it will make the
Yes.
exercise more interactive. So please feel to unmute and let us know why you feel that producers or brand owners have high level of engagement, and it can also be why civil society doesn't have that much engagement. You know that could also be a reason, like why people have assigned low level of engagement in civil society. If you want to say that, that's also welcome.
Yes, anybody, we would love to hear from someone.
So, Shruti, I think we are done with exercises for now.
Yes.
I don't see any more participants moving. So
Okay.
the interesting aspect is the majority of the participants have actually given high priority to ULBs and brand owners, and rightfully so. That means that shows that there's a high level of understanding about the EPR regime among the participants. So that's a very interesting take, and interesting part is the engagement of civil society and informal waste pickers have actually been given a low priority. Only 1% has actually given high priority to the informal sector.
Yes, I think because we can also share, if no one has anything to share, we just want to share that informal sector waste pickers are very central to the EPR regime, to an ideal EPR regime, that is, because they are the people
Interesting.
who collect the waste, who work with the waste. They are the ones who are collecting the what becomes resources and what can earn credit points to brand owners and producers or even to urban local bodies. So they are one of the most critical actors. So and sometimes even more critical than citizens or tourists, because ultimately they're the ones who are collecting the waste and who are working with the waste and who are probably, there has to be a setup, as Mr. Mehra rightly explained, that there has to be a network that has to be built between the ULB and the informal sector and the brand owners. And the ULB has to play a central role in integration of waste pickers.
Are there any comments from the participants on chat or on uh,
Yeah, anyone who
audio?
wants to say why it can be challenging to integrate informal sector waste pickers, or we would love to hear from our participants.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Tell
Yes,
us.
I just want to say that producers have the biggest responsibility as far as EPR is concerned, as they are making profit out of uh, selling all the items. So they are having the major responsibility.
Absolutely, ma'am. That's absolutely correct.
Yes.
Perhaps anyone else want to share anything else? Any other comments? Uh, so, Shruti, I believe that we don't have any more comments. So, shall we move on to the next
Yeah. Let's move
exercise?
on to the next exercise, Rajat.
Okay. So, we'll move to the next exercise. I hope my screen is visible. Sorry. So, I hope my screen is visible. So, I request everyone to use your right click and move to the second exercise. So, basically, what is happening here is actually so we earlier we focused on which what priority each stakeholder have. Now in this exercise, we need to map what is the role that each stakeholder should do. For example, like what should come under ULBs basically. Which activity should the following stakeholder do? So I would request every participant to map the activity according to the stakeholder. So we have ULBs, resident welfare associations, informal sector, civil society organizations, brand owners. Interesting. So I think I think the exercises are self-explanatory. I'm guessing because a lot of you have started to put different assign different priorities to different stakeholders even before explanation, which is a very good sign. And it's interesting. There is actually placards in every section except the informal sector. Oh, there's one in informal now. Great. Shruti, would you like to add anything to it?
No, I'm just looking at the answers. Could you zoom into it, Rajat, so that we could also?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll zoom into the
It might also
answers.
be useful if you want to join the Miro board to take a look at it if you can't see it on the screen.
I am trying to actually try. I tried to, which is I couldn't really.
So I have actually zoomed into the ULBs.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just
So
going to
many-
try again. Yes.
So many things participants have, given the correct, assigned the correct placards. For example, providing identity card to informal workers, that rightly comes under the ULBs. Implementation of solid waste management rules 2016, that also comes under ULBs. Providing dustbins, that comes under the ULBs, which is an interesting aspect. And providing training to informal sector action EPR. Of course, ULB can do it, but there are other stakeholders that may actually be able to do this much better, because too much of responsibilities on the ULBs might overburden the current resources that a ULB have. And when it comes to RWAs, raising awareness among source segregation, that is right. Promoting waste segregation among residents, that's also also correct. Forming a workers' rights cooperative under informal sectors, that's also right. Ensure that ULBs recognition is an aspect that of a different stakeholder that we'll explain when the final screen is shared. And even civil societies, many people have provided the right answers, like providing training for the informal sector.
Yeah, I see that everyone has each of them, the correct ones and the correct tables. So
Yeah.
I think that's.
And it's interesting to know that most answers have been pretty accurate, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
So and especially when it comes to producers, brand owners, and ULBs, most participants have given the right answers.
Yes.
Like elimination of zero waste plastics, EPR registration.
At the same time, if anyone wants to share a comment or wants to say anything, we're all eager to hear our participants.
I'm actually wondering, where the participants, the collection mechanism for waste generated. I couldn't see any answers for that. There's one in the civil society. That's something that's interesting. Actually, I'll just correct this one. Collection mechanism for waste generated actually is a responsibility of the producers, actually.
Or rather, it's shared. It's shared, definitely shared between. Certain responsibilities are to be shared between different stakeholders, especially between brand owners and ULBs. But also
so even the ULBs can also share the collection mechanism. Actually, ULBs and producers can both work together and establish a collection mechanism, involving even informal workers in civil society. So interesting. So I believe that right now, all the participants have finished, putting their relevant placards in their relevant forms. So can someone explain why collection mechanism for waste generated has been assigned to brand owners?
Any guesses? Any guesses would also work.
Or we can also say like which other stakeholder can create a collection mechanism for waste generated. is it just the responsibility of the brand owners, or do you think any other stakeholder could do the same? It could be civil society, informal sector waste pickers, residential association. You can answer in your chat, or you can actually unmute your microphone and answer the same. As we say, so for some answers, you don't have a correct answer for us, like the collection mechanism for waste generated. It could be a responsibility of brand owners and ULBs as well. So any other comments? So organized to counter challenges faced at work. So someone has actually assigned that to civil societies. So can someone explain that why you have assigned that specific organized to challenge to counter challenges at work to civil societies? Anyone? You could respond in the chat box, or you can unmute your microphone. Shruti? Hello?
Yeah, no, I'm just, yeah, any responses?
So
Otherwise, what we can do, Rajat, is that we can share the final.
third one.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we go to the final frame, what I need everyone to do is just think of the answers that you aggregated and just compare it to the final slide. And Mohini, could you unhide frame 3?
Why? Okay.
So we need to go to frame 3. Yes. So see, in frame 3, we have actually assigned. We don't have to do anything now. So basically, we have assigned. It's basically the exercise that you did earlier, and we have shown which placard folds into which slides. So that's actually shown in this. So basically, like it's shown that providing identity card to ULBs, to informal workers, is the job of the ULBs. So forming a workers-led cooperative is actually the responsibility of the waste pickers. So before we move into the exercise, I just want everyone to visualize and see. Like I'll give everyone a minute to see like which all compare these to the answers that you have actually provided in the previous section. As Shruti earlier mentioned, some answers like collection mechanisms for waste generated. This could actually be a shared responsibility between the producers and the ULPs.
That's true. And again, would be very nice if someone could tell us. Like for example, we are saying that integrating waste pickers is a big part of what the ULB should do, but we would also like to hear any on-ground experiences of why that may be a good idea, or why that has been a challenging experience. Like if we would love to hear from you, and it will be very useful and insightful for all of us to know if you face any challenges with these things, or if there is more that we can do. So please unmute yourself or write on chat, whatever. We really encourage you to tell us.
Has anyone here tried to integrate informal workers into their ULBs? Like, even if you have failed in the attempt, that's fine. Like, or the lessons learned in it. So, any attempts, if any ULBs has done. So, Shruti, I believe that we can go to the exercise. So I'll go to the exercise. So below the frame, you can actually see a bunch of priorities: high, medium, and low. So what I need everyone to do is, we have a set of activities. So saying that providing identity card for informal workers. So what priority should be assigned for that activity, whether it should be high, whether it should be low, or whether it should be medium. So, and provide and for one person has to assign one dot to each activity. So you just click, drag and drop in the site, just like how I'm doing. So that's all. I will put it back. So I encourage every participant to drag and drop the priorities to each activities. What priority do you assign to each activity? Every participant can mention.
So if I can come in
That's
here, the
nice.
priority could also be based on what would be feasible in your city for whatever reason that it may be, because it may vary across the cities of what kind of interventions you may want to take as your first priority or a second priority. So based on
Sure,
those
sure.
experiences, also if you all can mark, I think that would be interesting.
Sure, that's an interesting point. So what is priority for one ULB may not be the same for others. So that will be a very interesting aspect to watch. Providing identity card for. So SWM rules has actually been given a high priority by two respondents. Providing dustbins has been given high priority from by two. It's interesting. Actually, someone has actually assigned low priority for providing identity card to informal workers. So, yes, if anyone could explain, if have they created any infrastructure in the ULBs to segregate and collect and dispose plastic waste? Like it could be a decentralized MRFs. If we could know something about that, that will be interesting. Okay, I think there are no responses as of now. So providing identity cards to informal workers. So someone has actually given that a low priority. So if in the participants, if someone could explain why that has been going low priority. I think I can still see people moving around, which is a great thing. So once people have finished it, I think we'll evaluate each answers. Piece that has not been given any priority, so I would encourage like assisting in the organization ULPs, like collection mechanism for waste generated. So those actions assign any priorities, I would encourage people to put some priorities into those activities.
I think we have an interesting response in the chat as well. It says providing uniform. Mr. Ashutosh Singh Kushwaha says that providing uniform is more important than ID card. I can't say about more important, but I definitely agree with you on providing uniforms. Uniforms are very important. Definitely.
And Shruti, that's an interesting part. I think it's something that we can actually include in our exercises in the future. So that can be another aspect to it. So, sir, thank you for your suggestions. We'll definitely include that in future exercises. So, any other interesting suggestions do you think that we could have included for ULBs or any stakeholders? Please feel to mention that in the chat box. let's see which activity has the highest priority. So there is no highest priority as such as of now. We'll just wait for everyone to finish. Uh, so the high priority activities that we currently can see are integration of informal sectors, implementation of solid waste management rules, providing dustbins, promoting waste segregation among residents, raising awareness about source segregation among residents, elimination of value production in production for the producers brand owners, registering with ULPs to create linkages for waste collection and EPR, registration with the pollution control boards. It's interesting. We have also for civil society building awareness on plastic waste reduction. I think now that has the highest priority. I think the low and providing training for civil informal workers on EPR has actually seen a low priority, which is interesting. Shruti, would you like to add something else? Like, do you have any interesting observations that you can see?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just seeing what people are answering. It looks, yeah. So once
So
we're
before we
done with the exercise, we can also have a quick, we can have a quick
discussion
chat
on it.
about. Someone says that I am looking at the chat. Actually, there are a lot of comments that are coming. Someone says that giving incentive to health workers is important. I'm trying to understand what that means. I mean, do we mean health insurance to waste pickers or incentives to informal waste workers? Is that what we mean? There's another comment which says that buyback policy, especially plastic and recyclable products, where the producer manufacture, if this can be taken up at a higher level of implementation, definitely. Maybe once we're done with this, we will have 5 minutes of a quick discussion on it. If anyone else wants to explain what they want to say, and
Now, if you see that the priorities have actually changed, like from what it was like 2 minutes back. So, and elimination of zero value plastic in production is something that is currently, I think, has the highest number of, priority, followed by building awareness among uh, reduction of plastics. That's for civil societies.
yeah,
Registering with the ULBs. Interesting.
okay, Abraham. Okay.
So I think right now everyone is settled. I think so. Let's have a quick discussion on these aspects. So before we end this exercise, if we can actually understand this can really help understand how to prioritize different activities for different stakeholders. So that's the entire point objective of the exercise. Like we can understand like what activities should be prioritized for each stakeholder. And elimination of zero value plastic still has the highest priority. Can someone explain why, I'll repeat the question again, why providing training for informal sector has been assigned really low priorities?
I have one question
Yeah.
to you. Maybe anyone from the Chinson's team can also maybe elaborate a little bit on this. So this point on integration of informal waste pickers. So there are many ways. I'm sure it's also like a step by step of maybe having the policies, getting them into the planning, giving them ID cards, various other details. But if you can maybe from experience, or maybe if some city that has done this very efficiently, elaborate as to how cities can initiate, the process of integrating the informal waste pickers, and what does integration also mean to a certain extent?
Yes, definitely. So again, the ID card bit is only a step in the integration of informal waste pickers. So just to put it very, if I had to say step by step, I would say that first of all, it's one of the key priorities of informal sector integration is a decentralized waste management system, which is sort of, held, like, which is held authority, and which is sort of run by the urban local bodies. So with a decentralized waste management system, there'll be, first of all, there'll be, as someone said, the provision of uniforms is very important. The provision of spaces is very important to work and to segregate waste and do the waste work. Then there is also registering them, which also comes with giving ID cards. Again, that there was someone who spoke about incentives and health benefits. So providing them that kind of insurance, getting under schemes. That's the most one of the most important bits. Getting them under national schemes of be it with the NULM or with something like some health scheme. So or just helping them with having their Aadhaar cards, and just sort of ensuring those aspects becomes crucial in integrating them into the system. And then, of course,
So
create
basically, you're saying helping them with documentation as well.
documentation, of course, but also help them, giving them space. I think space is one of the
Right, right.
biggest. Providing space, setting up MRFs. These are some of the crucial aspects of integrating informal waste pickers. And there are quite a few examples actually. There is NDMC, which has done it to an extent. There is some of the Delhi municipalities have done a great job with it actually. So it can be seen all over. I think Indore, as far as I know, has done a good job.